I love my father. Call him my papa. He's the kind of dad who stands at the window when saying goodbye, all the way to the point where he can't see me anymore. So when I went away to college in the United States, he stood at the window. And when I got pregnant and I got married at a young age, he stood at the window with tears in his eyes. And every day I get the privilege, because he lives with me in Boston, where he gets to wave every day from the window until he can't see me anymore. He taught me tenderness and compassion. My father was also very nurturing, still continues to be very nurturing, loves to cook, as many Filipino dads do, taught me math alongside my older brothers. He actually started teaching me algebra in 2nd grade because my older brothers were learning it. Now, my mother was an incredibly aggressive entrepreneur. And she was also the chief household officer with 6 kids by the time she was in her mid-20s. Why am I sharing the story of my parents? Because I feel very fortunate, having been born and raised in the Philippines, where I didn't have parents raising me with gender stereotypes. I had a father who encouraged me to have a passion for math, which led to my passion for the coolness in technology. And I had a mother who was an entrepreneur. So my friend Maria Reza asked me to talk about my prediction in 2030 for women in tech. But I can't do that without the lens of sharing what it means to be a Filipina. It is part of who I am, and I'm very proud of it. So what makes the Philippines a very special place for women? As I started to study, by the way, this is my brother. When I started to study what was so special about being raised in the Philippines, in pre-colonial times, women were actually allowed to inherit. They were allowed to own property. They could trade. They also had leadership positions in clans. There were priestesses. There were village chiefs. They were, like in this picture, knowledgeable about medicine, and sometimes astrologers. So that's been our heritage. What I also found, and I started to learn, and this is just in recent years, this past decade, that we also have the narrowest gender gap in Asia. What does gender gap mean? It's actually attitudes and behaviors of the differences between men and women in certain societies and cultures. The Philippines has the narrowest gender gap. And out of the 136 in the Global Gender Gap Report, it's actually got the 5th. It's the only Asian country that's up in the top 10. And that same study in 2013 that actually identified that we have fully closed the gender gap in both education and health. What makes the Philippines so special? Pre-colonial heritage, the data is showing it. And look at the female leaders all around you. In government, in business, as executives, here are some of the stats. 53% of Filipino legislators and senior officials compared to other countries around the world. It's incredible. It reflects population. Women own more than 50% of the businesses in the Philippines. And in 2013, women held 24% on average senior management positions around the world, but in the Philippines, 37%. The 3rd highest in the world. Now let's talk about girls in science, technology, engineering, and management. And I see a lot of young people in the room. How many of you have classmates in science and technology and math and engineering that are women and girls? No one raising their hand, but a ton. Whereas in other countries around the world, they really struggle to try and encourage girls to even pursue STEM. And UNESCO found that women in science is on average only 30%. And in the Asia Pacific region, 20%, and in the Philippines, we're at 52%. That's in science and technology. And although the global trends are very challenging, around the world. My colleague Cora and I, who's here today, we just came back from Japan. And the struggles that Japanese women of the oppressive culture that they experience, we don't experience that here in the Philippines. Now, certainly there's always abuse and women struggle through that, but the kind of equality that our culture embraces in celebrating women, and Gina just talked about, in celebrating how different we are from each other. It's a unique culture that we should take great pride here in the Philippines. What are other observations I made of the Philippines? We are social creatures, and if you've heard all the stats already, whether that's online or offline, and certainly we are avid internet users. I don't know if you guys know, there's 105 million mobile subscribers in the Philippines. That's actually more than our population. So on average, higher ownership of a mobile phone than one. We also are the second top internet user in Southeast Asia at 38 million, which has gone up 10% in the past year. It's crazy. We rank number 10 in Twitter. No one's surprised because everyone's tweeting. You're doing it today. We are, by the way, at Social Good Rappler. And an 8th on Facebook. 30 million users on Facebook. That's about a third of our population on Facebook. Very social. We spend about 6 hours on the internet on average. 4 hours a day on the social sphere. We're not only connected online, but certainly offline. We're caring and we're a nurturing culture, aren't we? So the moment a typhoon hits, we hit #RescuePH, right? So during Ondoy, those who were stuck on their roofs could use their cell phones to post a tweet about their location. Photos of damaged areas instantly posted on Facebook also gave the rescuers a better idea which areas needed the most help. And during times of disaster, we're able to send key information to go very viral very quickly. The whole world was watching it. We were there for our kababayans, and we were fast. And a personal story, right after the typhoon, I came home. And I have to tell you, this role model, a good friend of mine, Doris Magsaysayho, she did this very silently. No one knew she did this. She wielded her power of inviting a group of the largest owners of the shipping industry. And I sat there in the room and watched her, and the ministers of finance and trade, in the room with her, she decided to call everybody in the room. She was the only woman. And she looked around all of them and said, here's what we're going to do, and here's how we're going to coordinate getting the vessels down to Leyte and Tacloban, and here's how it's going to work. She wielded that power, that incredible leadership, and I see it all the time in Filipino women. It's just something I'm so incredibly proud of. So back to my prediction, Mary Reza asked me in 2030 for women in tech. So what do we bring to the table? Actually, go back for a second. Ultimately, I actually think that women leaders use technology to make an impact on people's lives. We'll help to ensure equal and better access to basic resources, such as food, water, medicine, and energy. There's going to be more transparency in different industries. And I actually think there will be more female founders that can scale businesses by getting better access to capital, to networks, supply chain. Today in the United States, less than 10% of venture capital money go to female-led, female-founded companies. And yet more than 50% of entrepreneurs are women. And I also predict that when we see successful public companies making an impact on the world with our caring and nurturing culture, I can proudly say I really believe that more Filipina women will be behind that. And so how will female leaders feel? What's my prediction in 2030? Especially Filipinas, okay? First, two statistics come to mind. I don't often share this, but it's personal for me. When a reporter from the Wall Street Journal interviewed me earlier this year and called me about Care.com, he shared a stat with me that he found that under 3% of IPOs were led by female CEOs. Under 3%. And I said 50% of entrepreneurs are generally women. And that would mean it would be in the decimal percentage of public companies with female founders, not just female CEOs. I predict that we don't need to be a statistic anymore. It's not great to feel like you're just a piece of data point. And just recently, I received an award from Harvard Business School for the Alumni Achievement Award. I have to tell you, I was overwhelmed and humbled to be next to the CEO of Corning. I was also next to a serial entrepreneur who had exited and taken 7 companies public. And again, I felt this strange feeling in my stomach. I was the only woman in the room again. And I was again another statistic. And apparently the dean whispered to me that I was the youngest to have ever received it in the history of the school. It is often my role to be the only woman or one of the few women in technology in terms of leadership. And I've just gotten used to it. And you know, in clinical psychology, there's a phrase they call the imposter syndrome. How many of you have heard of it? Women tend to skew significantly higher with this mindset. And so when I was receiving the award, I sat there for a split second. And I asked myself, did they give me the award since I fulfilled a diversity box? I tell you, when my closest friends, we sit around and we talk about that. Did they pick me because I'm a woman? I predict that those feelings will go away. That in 30 years, the thought won't even cross my mind. And the imposter syndrome statistic won't just be about the female gender. Why? Because there's going to be incredible role models, Filipino women, so many of them for us to look up to. You just heard from Gina. I talked about the story of Doris, what Maria Reza is doing. It's incredible. Now, this vision won't naturally happen. How are you going to help, and what can you do about it? Let me first talk to the women in the room. As female leaders, we need to remember that our differences are our strengths. The differences are our strengths. They're not excuses, and they're not to hide behind. They're our strengths. So you need to raise your hand. I talk about this all around the world, and it's something Gina and I probably share, is that if you're in a leadership position and you're the rare minority, what are you doing about it? And if we've got the narrowest gender gap and we've got incredible female leaders, then raise your hand up high, really high as a female leader. Because so many people need role models. And we can do that in the Philippines because we can be role models globally for so many women. The other thing about women is this imposter syndrome, but the other key driver is what happens around expecting perfection. How many of you go home on a weekend and you don't want to go out until napakalinis ng bahay? Right? And everything's done and complete. But that actually happens in your career too. What holds you back? Why do you get nervous? Because as women, we have this thing about perfection. We can't pursue our passions until it's perfect. You got to let go of all those perfections. And Madeleine Albright has this amazing quote that she says there's a place in hell for women who don't help other women. But I actually think there's a heaven when we ourselves ask each other for help. It's okay to ask for help as women. And women are also masters at doing something men simply can't, may not want to do. They're masters at balancing what I call opposing forces. What do I mean by that? There's a resilience and dynamism. You can be both nurturing and tough. I always share this story. I can be the warmest mom. Now, but when I'm on my cell phone and my son comes up to me asking me whether he can play a video game while I'm busy on the phone, what kind of look do you think I give him? Now, why can't I bring that look to work? How's that any different? Why can't I be both loving and tough? It's also being a team builder and having that game face that I just talked about. That game face I use with my son on the mobile phone, I use with investors and bankers. Why not? Why can't you be both? And at the same time, bring that team building, that collaboration to work, facilitating great conversations, and can be also creative and analytical. What's wrong with that? Sometimes you hear this negative, phrase of like being a chameleon. Why is a chameleon a bad thing? I don't think it should have a negative connotation. It's a strength that we can be both managing the opposing forces of our strengths. Now, I don't want to forget the men in the room. And so I'll leave you with a final story. It's actually about my son, Adam. Now, most people think they can change the world through their children. I have a 14-year-old son named Adam. He's my youngest. And he's just on the verge of manhood. He's actually about 5'11", so I'm the shortest now in my family. He started shaving his mustache. And I know this is filmed. I'm sorry, sweetheart. He's starting to wear deodorant. We will launch a debate of, when was the last time he showered. I think if I raised him here in the Philippines, we wouldn't be having that debate. He also plays in the United States center nose tackle in American football. He's really big and he's tough, and that position blocks the quarterback. And he's got a wicked game face, as you can see. He actually didn't want me to take this picture. But he's also this. He's also in a choir. Not only does he play football, and just 18 months ago, believe it or not, he sang treble soprano. So obviously he's now baritone. He's got a much deeper voice. So one day he comes home and he tells me, "Mom, the football players in my class don't want me to sit by my artistic friends who sing." A lot of kids get pressure around these things. And here I was ready to jump in as a mother to kind of give him advice. And he looked over at me and he said, No. I got it, Mom. My friends don't get it. The football player guys just don't get it. My artistic friends are interesting. I love the conversations we have about reading. And here I was sitting there realizing my son had gotten it. My son understood what it meant to woman up. And so how can all of us, men and women in this room, woman up, so that we don't have to talk about statistics between men and women in 2030, but rather celebrate our differences? That is a blend of who raised us, where we came from, our life experiences, and how we can make a lasting impact on the world through our children, as Filipino men and Filipinas, working together as leaders. Thank you for having me.